Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile video, and in this one I'm going to talk about the minion meta rings. There are essentially two big differences and two versions that you can run with this, and it also fits two different types of builds, and you can do them in quite a few different ways, and I'll be talking about the majority of these crafting methods in this video. There will be later on a written version that will be linked in the descriptions below, so do check that out. The rings I'm using, they are energy shield based with percent energy shield and flat energy shield, as you can see here. They also have a lot of intelligence, and they have a veiled modifier of strength dexterity. This is basically the top of the line kind of approach for minion meta when it comes to playing CI version for minion builds. Both of my rings are pretty similar to one another, and I'll explain this crafting process as well. But first, I'm going to talk about the two differences when it comes to the rings. And the two different ways of doing this is, if you're looking at a ring, whatever base you need, an unset or a baseline resistance ring, is a minion that deals damage. Now, the thing is with minion deals damage is that you can get this from a Redeemer influence. The Redeemer influence allows you to have up to 25% minion damage. It is a prefix modifier. The other version of minion damage is the delve specific modifier. The delve specific modifier gives up to 35% minion damage, but it also only has the possibility of being a suffix. The problem with a delve modifier is that these rings only drops with this modifier. They're capped at the highest item level in delve to get this is 83. And the other aspect to think about is that if you have a ring with this modifier, when you craft on it, you are unable to remove the minion damage, and you cannot get that back. So if you're crafting on a ring with the delve one, which is the best version of this in my opinion, obviously, because it gets 10% more highest minion damage approach, whatever you do with the craft can never remove it. So I'm going to try to go through this entire process. So do try to keep pay some attention to this, and we'll be checking that out. So first things first, the approach of using a Redeemer influence allows you to use an Awakener's Orb on another influence, such as Crusader for Energy Shield if you're going for ES. I'll be talking about the life-based ring, of course, first, because that's the low-budget approach to this. I would not go for Redeemer rings. Instead, what I would do is I would go to trade, and I would basically search for minions deal, and then scroll down to the implicit modifier, and then make sure that I'm searching for a ring. Now, if I want an unset ring, then I would just search for an unset ring, and I just click that over here, make sure it's a ring, and that it has an implicit minion deals damage. In this case, sorry, why am I searching for implicit? I'm stupid, my bad. And you would search for a minion damage, but since the Redeemer tier 1 is 25% as the top tier, you can just search for 26. Another way of doing it is to search for for not, and then include Redeemer influence. And having it like this will also net the same results. A search like this will only show me delve modifier underground rolled minion damage rolls, or I can take this away and search for 26 or higher minion damage, and again, I will never show any Redeemer rings. If I remove this and I do the search, I will then start showing Redeemer rings as well as the unset rings that have the underground roll. So if you're looking for the underground roll, you would just search for 26 like this, and that'll be the 1% off, but you're not going to show the ones that have 25. So the best way to do it, to show all of them, is to change this into a not showing Redeemer influenced rings. So that's how you search for the ring. And now that we know how to search for it, there's a couple things you need to understand, and that is that you cannot remove the minion damage, or you're not going to be able to keep the minion damage or reapply it to the ring. So all the crafts with this process cannot be taken that away. So for low budget, what do you do? Normally what I would do is I would search for, I'd create a count group, and I would search for 1 in that count, and either have a reasonable amount of HP like 50, or simply search for prefix with an empty prefix modifier and have 1. This will now show me an outcome where the ring has either 50 HP or an empty prefix, which I can benchcraft with life on instead. And doing the search, I can see that this ring here, it doesn't have a life roll, but as you can see, there's 3 suffixes and only 1 prefix. I can benchcraft an HP on this, and this ring would actually be perfectly fine to use. Now, obviously, intelligence is not really needed for most minion builds. Strength and dexterity is obviously a lot more attractive, so something like this one would be even better, but this one doesn't have resistances. If you want to search for more specific modifiers, I could, for example, add the fact that I want like 40 dexterity out of it. and then they're going to cost a lot more currency. But this is basically how you fine tune the search for this. If I want resistances, I can search for percent total elemental resistance. Say I want at least 60% total resistances, then rings that has that amount of resistance will show up. So again, for the low budget versions of this ring going HP, what I would do is I would search for dexterity most cases, and I would try to buy some of these rings and then just benchcraft the HP, or find rings that actually already has the HP with an open suffix. So in that case, I would do a search for a life roll and have the life roll be 50 plus, and instead I would take this away and I would search for a open suffix modifier instead, so I can bench a resistance craft. And as you can see, this one has benched HP, so I can't use this one to get resistances. And this is specifically for unset rings. If I remove the unset, I will now start showing a bunch of other rings, from bad bases with crit into life bases into resistance bases for 11 chaos. Like this ring here, this one has 24 plus 25 resistances. So this is 49% elemental resistances, as well as the minion damage and a benched HP, and it only costs 11 chaos. So things like this is very easy to achieve, and can be utilized quite effectively for a low budget approach to this build. As soon as you start including dexterity, they do go up in price quite extensively because of the fact of how popular and how required or needed the dexterity roll is. So how do you then do it when it comes to the energy shield rings? Now in energy shield rings, you can obviously do the same thing. For the baseline energy shield, I would, instead of HP, start showing, looking for crafts that has energy shield. And obviously you're in more cases than not want to have that extra dexterity, and I would just search for them with 40 energy shield, and you'll see that there are actually no available rings right now that has an open suffix modifier with a dexterity roll. So if I take away that modifier and I'll do a search, you can see that I'll get some rings. Bad base, bad base, bad, bad, and this one's good, but this is already crafted with high tiers of dexterity and strength. So in these situations, when it comes to energy shield, you're more often than not forced to actually craft them. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that, depending on how much you're willing to spend. The most important approach when it comes to going with the energy shield bases is to make sure that your suffixes are sorted. And there are two different ways of doing this. You have the possibility to look for one specific suffix modifier, and then you have the possibility to look for two specific modifiers. So let's start with looking for one specific. And what we're doing is that we're looking for minion damage, which is a suffix modifier. And then you want to make sure that you're in a position where you have a high dexterity. In this case, I would then search for at least 42 dexterity, and I would search for this ring. And as you can see here, I have the possibility to buying this ring right here. There's a little bit of intelligence, which is actually not bad, because intelligence gives you energy shield. So this ring would be perfectly fine to use. The only problem is that you'll have to finish crafting this, and the way you would finish crafting this specific ring is if I go to an emulator and I put these modifiers in, which is dexterity, as well as well, what else was it? There was dexterity, intelligence, and the minion damage. Let's just say that the chaos res is minion damage, and there was intelligence on it as well. The way you would craft this is two different ways. You can do a harvest where you do a reforged keeping suffix. I wouldn't try to do this till I get an energy shield, because you can spam these for ages and still not get anything worthwhile out of it. So the other approach to this is actually to bench craft a prefix modifier called suffix cannot be changed. This craft here is cost 2 exalteds to put on the item. However, what you can do after that is do the reforge with more common defense craft. Because if you do it this way, what happens with more common is that the reforged defense will guarantee 1 defensive outcome on the ring, and more common will increase the weight by 10 times on the other modifiers that have a defensive tag. Looking at the modifier list here, and I can search for defense. As you can see here, it will roll evasion and it will roll energy shield. Those are the 2 modifiers that will roll. So by using this specific craft on the item, as you can see here, we got a really bad tier of energy shield and we got evasion rating. Also, if you have a ring that looks like this, you can just ignore the entire idea of spending that much currency and just bench craft the energy shield and simply be done with it by doing it this way. And there you go. That's your energy shield ring that you can play with. To take it a step further, then we're going to go back to the trade window and we're going to search for something like a resistance or a high intelligence. High intelligence is very popular, so let's search for another 42 of intelligence. You can see that these ring bases, all right, this is a bad base, but this one right here is really good. But as you can see, the prices for these skyrockets quite extensively when you do it this way. So because of this, I would recommend that you look into the approach of doing these crafts in a more specific way. Like this ring here is actually crazy good because the dexterity and intelligence are both tier 1. This is actually an insanely good base ring to craft on, but it also costs 5 exalteds. So when we're looking at more expensive crafts and comparing something to what I have, I'm actually looking for a high intelligence, and then I'm trying to get a veiled modifier on the suffix, and these are for the very, very high budget versions, because once you've gotten your energy shield, you can use a Crusader Orb to get the percent energy shield, and there's a couple of things you can do if that fails. But I'll talk about the initial stage of the super high budget version of crafting this. And what I would do is I would first compare what the tier 1 modifier for intelligence requires, which is 51 intelligence. So I would only search for 51 intelligence on a minion damage ring, and they look like this. 8 chaos orbs. The problem, well, actually, this one's amazing. I might actually buy that. Most rings don't look like that. If you see a ring like this, then you would just buy it if you're going for the big dick crafts. Most rings looks like this. And what then happens, I'm going to show you in the emulator again. What happens then is if the item, because I can't add the minion damage here. So let's say the chaos rest is the minion damage. What would then happen is I need to remove one of the suffix modifiers, which means that 2 of the suffix modifiers you want to keep, and you need to open it up so that you can get a veil modifier in there. Only way to do that reasonably would be to either annul orbit by like this. In this case, the item brick, then I would have to buy a new base. The other proper process that you can do is to beast craft it with a removing a suffix, adding a prefix, and that can be done as well. But annulment orbs are actually in the current state of the league cheaper, so I would do this till I reach the point where I remove the mod that I don't want. So if we're saying that in this case we have an intelligence roll that looks like this with a that's benchcraft, my bad. Mod pool intelligence, it looks like this, and we want to keep the min damage and the intelligence. We want to remove the dexterity by annulling it, and if that fails, you'll have to buy another base on the market, rinse repeat till this happens. And when this is done, now the RNG really starts to kick in for this craft. This is a very, very expensive craft to do, and what you would do is you would first off bench craft a prefix called suffixes cannot be changed. This is a 2 exalteds investment. Then you would use a veiled chaos orb, and there are 3 different outcomes of this chaos orb. Either you will fill up the suffix slot with a random modifier, which means you have to start over from the first initial process of trying to get rid of that modifier. The other thing that can happen is that nothing gets filled in there, which means that you have to open up the suffix slot again. Open up a prefix slot to do this. And the third outcome is that you get a veiled suffix, which is what we're looking for. So in this case, we got a veiled prefix, but as you can see, we got a dexterity roll. So if this happens, you would have to again annul, try to get rid of that dexterity roll, and if it fails, you have to buy a new base. And then you have to pop the veiled chaos orb once you get to this stage again. Pop it again. In this case, I did get a veiled suffix, which is what we're looking for. And in this case, you would unveil it. And in this case, you can see that I actually got completely trash modifiers. This is not what we're looking for the big dick version. So in this case, it would have to again go to the process of annulling it and getting to this stage again. And if it fails, buy a new base. As you can see, this process is extremely annoying. Another suffix, you'd have to restart getting rid of it. Veil suffix, this one we actually finished, so we have to unveil it, and in this case we did get the strength dexterity, which is actually what I'm looking for in my rings. And now that we can now we've gotten to this stage, the suffixes are completed, as we call it. So at this stage you would want to get the energy shield. Now there's a couple different ways of doing this. My personal preference is to use a suffix cannot be changed bench crafted prefix like this. This will safeguard the 3 suffixes that we now have confirmed are the ones we're looking for, and then go to harvest, reforge defense more common, and doing it this way. And as you can see, we got completely jack shit from it. It would actually be even smarter to do the regular reforge defense in this case, because we'd rather not have the evasion. As you can see, we're getting completely trash modifiers out of this in the reforge defense with the suffix can't be changed. We got evasion rating, and each time you roll this is a reforged defense craft, but most importantly, it also costs you 2 exalteds. and you would rinse repeat this entire process with spending 2 exalted per reroll till you get a decent like tier 2, or in this case tier 1 energy shield roll. As you can see here, we got a life roll, and the only way to fix the ring in this situation is that we want to keep that energy shield, but you don't want the life roll. Now you have to spend 2 exalted for a suffix can't be changed, and then you have to annul it. And the annulment in this process will either remove the benchcraft, the energy shield, or the life. In this case, we lost the benchcraft, which means you have to reapply the suffix can't be changed for another 2 exalteds, and now we got rid of the life roll. And in this situation, you change the benchcraft into a mana because that has the highest weight. And now that you change this into a mana bench, you will simply use a influenced orb, in this case being a Crusader orb, and pray this gives you % energy shield. And this one failed. If it fails, it's going to be another process. But if it doesn't fail, the ring will look something like... I'm just going to add it. The ring will look like this. At least tier 2 or something. The ring will look like this, and now you've finished the ring, and you can change the benchcraft to whatever you want. However, if it fails, but you have now an influence orb, you can't use another Crusader orb to apply that energy shield. So instead, the process at this point would be to go back to the whole idea of suffix can't be changed to suffix can't be changed like this with a benchcraft for another 2 exalteds. And now you would use the harvest craft that is reforged more likely, because now there are 2 different defense modifiers that you want and one that you don't want. You rinse repeat this process, and at any given time you end up with something like this, that you have a tier 2 or higher flat or % energy shield. You would do like I mentioned earlier with a bench crafted block with mana, and then simply slam it with a normal exalted orb. And in this case we got jack shit, and now you have to go back to the suffix that can't be changed to craft it like this. You can annul this and try to slam it again, like doing it this way, and then reapply it for 2x every time that happens. Jesus. And if this happens, you would then change it to a mana block and then slam again. It's a very, very expensive process to do this. It's extremely expensive to do this. Either way, so that's the way you craft the rings that I have, for those of you who've been asking me a lot about this. So I'm going to go back to the low budget approach of this craft and talk about this a little bit more and how you can achieve this in a good way. So let's go back to the idea of finding a ring that works for the lower budget version. Most of them will want dexterity. So again, I'm searching for dexterity. I want to make sure it's not a redeemer ring, that it has melee damage, and it is a ring. I'm searching for high dexterity, and then I want to have a count group of 1. I'm searching for a decent amount of life, in this case 50, or an open prefix so I can bench craft it and doing the search. And as you can see, these rings, these are perfectly fine. This one would even work for energy shield. It's not the best, but this would work for energy shield. You can bench energy shield. You just change this into an energy shield roll instead, and you'll be able to search for that as well. Another way of searching for them is depending on how much currency you're willing to spend, and that just includes adding some actual resistance rolls. So if I do this and we search for resistances, then we can start seeing the 2-stone rings. We'll start seeing rings that have actual suffix modifiers with resistances. And the higher resistances or the higher stats you go with, the more expensive the ring will be. So normally I don't craft the life-based rings. I just buy something I can smack a craft on and be done with it. And when it comes to the energy shield rings in the initial stage, I would just buy something I can bench and be done with it. And the next stage, the only time I would actually bother crafting on these rings is actually when it comes to the very big versions, which does require a ton of currency depending on to what point you want to bring them in. If you're just looking for one type of energy shield, it's not that bad to craft. It really isn't that hard. It does cost a lot of currency, but as soon as you want to get 2 energy shield rolls, it gets stupidly expensive. Anyways, I don't want to drag on with this video too much because it's pretty straightforward. Hope you guys had use of this video, whether you're playing the life-based low budget or if you're going into CI high big dick version of it. Doesn't really matter. I hope you had use of the video. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and let me know in the comments below what you think of this video if you had any use of it. Till next time, stay safe and keep rocking.